Hello, aspirants, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a really critical topic, industrial safety. Now, this isn't just about memorizing facts. It's about building that sharp, analytical perspective you're gonna need for your mains exam, and of course, for the personality test.
So let's kick things off with a fundamental question. We hear the word accident all the time for industrial tragedies, boiler explosions, gas leaks, but is that really the right word? Or are these events actually the predictable final step in a long chain of failures? Just keep this question at the back of your mind as we move through this explainer.
Our analysis today is anchored in a fantastic article from The Hindu, which really unpacks this concept of creeping risk. We're going to use its key insights to build a framework that you can directly apply in your exam preparation. All right, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll tackle the illusion of accidents. Then, we'll decode creeping risk. After that, we'll look at systemic and labor issues, connected it all directly to your UPSC syllabus, and finally, talk about the way forward. This should give you a really solid structure for your notes.
So let's jump right into our first section, the illusion of accidents. To really get a grip on the problem, we first have to see how it shows up in the real world.
Just take a look at this timeline of recent tragedies. You've got the Visakhapatnam gas leak in 2020, the Neyveli boiler blast that same year, and more recently, the Shakti boiler explosion in Chhattisgarh in 2024. See, what becomes clear is that this isn't just a series of random, unconnected incidents. It's a pattern, and these events, they're symptoms of a much deeper, systemic problem.
And that pattern? Well, it gets right to the core argument of the article we're looking at. The engineering reality is that complex systems, like these massive industrial boilers, they just don't fail out of the blue. The pressure, the stress, the ignored maintenance, it all builds up, bit by bit over time. The final explosion is just the tragic end to a long story of risk that was allowed to accumulate.
Which, is the perfect segue into our second section, where we're going to decode that very concept, creeping risk.
So what exactly is creeping risk? This is a key term you'll want to highlight in your notes. It's the slow, gradual, and often invisible buildup of small failures. Think of it less as a single event and more as a process, a slow burn of operational shortcuts and regulatory blind spots that eventually makes a huge disaster not just possible, but almost inevitable.
This slide here really breaks down the anatomy of how that failure happens. It all starts with unstable operations, like, for instance, running that new boiler in Sakti at full blast right away. Step 2 is neglected maintenance. Then comes Step 3, audit failures, where the regulatory system just fails to spot these growing problems. And the final result, Step 4, is that catastrophic system failure.
Now this brings us to our third section. Let's widen our lens a bit and look at the bigger picture, the systemic and labor vulnerabilities that basically create the perfect environment for this creeping risk to grow.
For your mains answer, this is a classic analytical point you need to understand, this paradox of ease of doing business. On one hand, the goal is obviously to encourage industrial growth, but the side effect we're seeing is a dilution of safety oversight. When you move towards things like self-certification and scheduled audits, instead of tough, surprise inspections, you create a regulatory vacuum where these creeping risks can just multiply unchecked.
So who is most at risk here? The article makes it painfully clear it's the contract laborers. They're often hired through subcontractors, which creates these huge accountability gaps. Many workers come from different regions and face language barriers, making safety manuals pretty much useless. In Pune, workers didn't even know the names of the dangerous chemicals they were handling. And to top it off, the ASHW Code of 2020 has been criticized because it doesn't clearly pin criminal liability on the main employer.
Okay, now for what is arguably the most crucial part of your prep, linking this entire discussion directly to the UPSC syllabus. Let's see why this all matters for your exam.
For GS Paper 3, the connection is crystal clear. It links directly to industrial policy and its effects on industrial growth. Think about it. An industrial policy that overlooks safety is fundamentally unsustainable. These disasters don't just cost lives, they halt production, they destroy capital, and they really damage the investment climate. That's a powerful point for any question on industrial growth.
And for GS Paper 2, it's a perfect fit for government policies and their implementation. This whole idea of creeping risk is a textbook example of an implementation failure, a governance deficit. It really brings up some fundamental questions about the role of our regulatory bodies and the ethical duties of the state, which ties in directly to the role of civil services.
With all that in mind,
Here is the potential mains question for you to practice. Creeping risk in industrial safety is a manifestation of a governance deficit rather than mere technical failure. Critically analyze. I want you to use the framework we've just discussed, the definition, the policy paradox, the labor vulnerabilities, to build a really solid, comprehensive answer. And if this topic comes up in your interview, these are the high-value points you should have ready to go. Be prepared to talk about that delicate balance between labor reforms and safety, the challenge of promoting economic growth while strengthening regulation, how technology can play a role, and of course the fundamental ethical responsibilities of both companies and the state.
All right, let's wrap this up with our final section. Let's look at the way forward, but from the perspective of an administrator, which is exactly the role you are all aspiring to.
This quote from the article really hits home, doesn't it? It says the cycle will just keep going until we dismantle this culture, a culture that simply accepts these horrifying tragedies as a cost of doing business. It tells us that the problem isn't just technical or regulatory, it's cultural. It's about a mindset.
And so, we're going to leave you with this final thought. As a future administrator, a future decision maker, what is the one key institutional reform that you would push for to break this vicious cycle? Would you strengthen the inspectorate, maybe leverage technology for surprise e-audits, or would you focus on reforming labor laws to ensure real accountability? Think about it, because your answer to that question really reflects the kind of administrator you hope to become.